The millionaire was a man who seemed to have everything anyone could dream of. He owned a large house with shining marble floors, wide glass windows, and gardens that stretched like small parks. Expensive cars were lined up in his driveway, each one polished until it gleamed. Inside his mansion, the walls were decorated with priceless art, chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling, and the furniture looked like it had come straight from a royal palace. Anyone looking at his life from the outside would think he must be the happiest man alive. But behind those tall gates and locked doors, his house was far from warm. The man had twin children, a boy and a girl, who were the joy of his heart when they were first born. At that time, he had promised himself he would always be there for them, that he would give them the best life any father could. But as the years went by, business became his main concern. Meetings, travels, and endless deals consumed him. He believed that by working harder, by making more money, he was securing a bright future for his children. He thought expensive toys, a private school, and all the comfort in the world would make them happy. What he did not realize was that what they needed most was his time. The twins, only 7 years old, grew up in that enormous house without their mother. She had passed away when they were very young, leaving behind only memories and photographs. With their father always busy, they found comfort in the presence of the maid. She was not just any worker, she became the heart of the household. She was a black woman in her mid-30s, strong and kind, with eyes that always carried warmth and a voice that calmed the children like a soft lullaby. She worked hard from morning till night, cleaning rooms, preparing meals, and making sure the children were never left alone. Despite her many duties, she always found time for the twins. She tied their shoelaces before school, braided the little girls' hair, listened to their stories, and wiped away their tears. She told them bedtime stories, sang them songs, and sometimes even acted out little plays just to see them laugh. The children clung to her whenever they felt scared, sick, or lonely. She had no riches to give, but she gave them love, and that was more valuable than all the toys their father bought. The millionaire hardly noticed these small details. To him, the maid was simply doing her job, and he assumed his children were happy because they had everything. He often walked past their rooms in a hurry, not stopping to listen to their laughter or to notice how they followed the maid everywhere like shadows. He thought success meant keeping his business strong and his reputation higher than his rivals. He did not realize that while he was chasing deals, his children were slowly growing distant from him. Life in the mansion looked perfect, but to the twins, the house often felt empty. The rooms were too big, the halls too quiet, and the expensive toys lost their shine quickly when no one played with them. They longed for something money could not buy: attention, comfort, and love. The maid filled that gap as best as she could. Sometimes she sat with them on the carpet, playing games with nothing more than paper and crayons. Other times, she cooked simple meals and fed them with her hands, something their father never thought of doing. At night, when the twins were afraid of the dark, she stayed beside them until they fell asleep, whispering gentle words that made them feel safe. The millionaire often returned home late. By then, the twins would already be asleep, and he would tiptoe past their rooms, glancing only briefly before heading to his own luxurious bedroom. He never stopped to wonder why they looked so peaceful, or who had tucked them in. He assumed they were fine, because in his mind, comfort came from wealth, not presents. But deep inside, he carried a quiet emptiness too. His late wife's absence weighed heavily on him, though he buried himself in work to avoid facing the pain. He convinced himself that staying busy was the best way to forget his grief. He did not notice how the maid had quietly stepped into the role of mother, how she gave the children a kind of happiness he himself could not. The twins adored their father, but they rarely got time with him. When he did appear, they rushed to him with stories of their day, but he often nodded absent-mindedly, distracted by phone calls or thoughts of his next meeting. Slowly, they stopped trying to get his attention. Instead, they poured their little hearts into the maid, who listened to every word they said with patience. To outsiders, the millionaire was a man at the top of the world. Inside his home, his children were living two separate lives, one filled with riches but empty of affection, the other simple but full of love, thanks to the maid. And though he did not know it yet, one evening would open his eyes in a way that would change everything forever. That evening began like many others. The sun had set, the lights of the mansion glowed against the night sky, and the staff went about their chores. The twins, after a long day at school, asked the maid to tell them one of her stories. She smiled, sat down on the carpeted floor, and began weaving a tale with her gentle voice. The children leaned against her, their eyes heavy with sleep. Soon, they were curled up beside her, drifting off into dreams as she too closed her eyes from exhaustion. In the silence of the night, the millionaire's car pulled into the driveway earlier than usual. He had cut his meeting short, hoping to surprise his children. Little did he know that the real surprise was waiting for him just beyond their bedroom door. The millionaire pushed open the grand doors of his mansion that evening, his footsteps echoing softly across the polished marble floor. It was unusual for him to come home this early. Normally, by this time, the house was silent except for the faint sounds of the night staff finishing their work. Tonight, he wanted to check on his twins, maybe spend a few minutes with them before going to bed. Something in his heart told him to go upstairs instead of heading straight to his study or his room. As he climbed the staircase, he noticed how quiet everything was. Usually, the laughter of the twins or their little arguments carried through the hallways. He smiled faintly, wondering if they had finally fallen asleep without fussing. When he reached their room, he gently pushed the door open, not wanting to disturb them. What he saw made him freeze. There, on the soft carpeted floor beside the children's beds, lay the maid, her head resting on a folded blanket. The twins were curled up against her on either side, their small arms draped over her as if holding on to the most precious treasure they had. The soft glow of the night lamp lit up their faces. Their breathing was calm and steady, the kind of peaceful sleep that only comes when a child feels safe and loved. The millionaire stood at the doorway, stunned. His children had the finest beds money could buy. The mattresses were custom-made, the blankets soft as clouds, the pillows designed for comfort. Yet here they were, sleeping on the floor with the maid. Not once, but so naturally, as though this was a common thing for them. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the scene. For a moment, he thought of waking them and putting them back into their beds. But something stopped him. The twins looked so happy, so content, that he could not bring himself to break the moment. His eyes shifted to the maid. Her face, even in sleep, showed signs of the long day she had spent working, yet there was a softness there too, a quiet patience, a love that needed no words. For the first time in years, the millionaire felt like an outsider in his own home. It was as if the warmth that should have come from him as their father had somehow been replaced by her. His chest grew heavy with emotions he could not name. Was it shame? Was it jealousy? Or was it simply the realization of how much he had missed? He quietly sat down on the edge of one of the beds, watching them. Memories of his late wife came rushing back. She used to tuck the children in, sing them lullabies, and tell them stories until they fell asleep. She used to say that children never remembered the toys or the expensive gifts, but they always remembered the moments when they felt safe in their parents' arms. At the time, he had brushed off her words, thinking she was just being sentimental. Now, as he watched his children clinging to someone else for comfort, he finally understood what she had meant. The longer he looked, the more he realized how blind he had been. He had thought his wealth could replace everything, even love. He had filled the house with things but had left it empty of himself. The maid, with her simple ways and kind heart, had given the twins what he could not, presence. She had sat with them when they cried, listened when they wanted to talk, and held them when they were afraid. It was no wonder they chose her company over the luxuries around them. His throat tightened. He wanted to blame someone, blame the maid for taking his place, blame his work for keeping him away, even blame fate for leaving him a single parent. But deep down, he knew there was no one to blame but himself. He had been so busy trying to build an empire that he had forgotten the small kingdom right in front of him, his family. The millionaire stayed there for a long time, listening to the soft breaths of his children. At one point, his son stirred and opened his eyes slightly. The boy looked at his father sleepily, then reached out his tiny hand. For a brief second, the millionaire thought his son would call him closer. Instead, the boy shifted and tucked himself closer against the maid, falling back into deep sleep. That single moment broke something inside him. He stood up quietly, not wanting to disturb them, and stepped out of the room. His footsteps were slower now, heavier. He walked down the hallway, his mind racing. He realized that his children did not run to him for comfort anymore. Their trust and love had found a home elsewhere. And yet, instead of anger, he felt a strange gratitude. At least someone had been there for them. At least someone had given them the love he had failed to give. That night, he could not sleep. He lay awake in his grand bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of the twins on the floor, arms around the maid, played over and over in his mind. It was not the scene itself that shook him, it was what it meant. It was a mirror showing him everything he had ignored, everything he had lost, and everything he still had a chance to fix. As the hours passed, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would no longer live as a stranger in his own home. He would find a way to bridge the distance between him and his children. He would learn to sit with them, listen to them, and maybe even lie down on the floor if that's what it took to feel close again. For the first time in years, the millionaire's heart felt restless, not for money or success, but for something deeper, for love, for connection, for family. The following morning, the maid woke up before the children, as she always did. She carefully lifted their small heads, tucking pillows beneath them so they could continue sleeping. She tiptoed out of the room to start her chores, not knowing that the millionaire had been watching her silently from the hallway. He did not say a word, but inside, his respect for her grew. He realized that she was not just an employee, she was the thread that held his children's fragile world together. The day began like any other, but the millionaire carried a different weight now. He had seen something that changed the way he looked at his children, his maid, and himself. He could no longer pretend that money alone could raise a family. Something had shifted in his heart, though he did not yet know how to act on it. What he did know was clear: his children deserved better than a father who only gave them things. They deserved a father who gave them himself. The millionaire spent the next few days going through his life as usual, but something inside him had changed. The image of his children sleeping on the floor beside the maid never left his mind. During business meetings, while signing documents, even while dining with his rich friends, the picture came back to him again and again. At first, he tried to brush it aside, telling himself it was not a big deal. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized it was not just a scene, it was a truth he had been avoiding for years. His children were growing up without him. One evening, after finishing a long meeting in his study, he closed his laptop and sat silently in the leather chair. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of the maid telling a story upstairs. He could hear the children's laughter echoing faintly down the hall. It was a sound he had not heard directed at him in a very long time. The realization stung. They used to laugh with him when they were babies, reaching out their tiny arms. Now, they had chosen someone else to give their joy to. The millionaire poured himself a glass of water and sat in deep thought. For years, he had believed that wealth meant security, that success meant his family would never have to suffer. But now he saw that while he had given them everything money could buy, he had failed to give them what mattered most. His wife's words from long ago came back to him like whispers in the night: "Children do not remember the gifts, they remember the love." He placed the glass down and rubbed his temples. He had been so blind. The next morning, he decided to quietly observe his children. Instead of rushing out early for work, he stayed at home for a while, watching them prepare for school. The maid helped them get dressed, fixed their breakfast, and tied their shoelaces. The twins chattered happily with her, telling her about their dreams and their plans for the day. The millionaire sat at the dining table, unnoticed for a moment, and listened. It hurt him to realize that his children seemed more natural with her than with him. They shared little secrets with her, laughed freely, and looked at her with trust in their eyes. When they finally noticed him, they gave him polite smiles, almost shy, as if they weren't sure how to act around their own father. The distance between them was clear. That night, he sat in his room again, reflecting. Anger rose in him for a moment. Not anger at his children or even at the maid but at himself. He wondered how many nights he had missed when they needed him. How many stories he could have told. How many hugs he could have given. How many times they had longed for him, only to settle for silence. The thought broke his heart. But along with the sadness came determination. He realized it was not too late. His children were still young, and though he had missed many moments, he could still change the future. He could still become the father they needed. The question was how. He had never been good at expressing emotions. He had spent years in boardrooms, not playrooms. He had built companies, not bonds. He was afraid he would not know how to start. That fear sat heavily in his chest, but so did the image of the twins curled up with the maid. That picture became his motivation. The following day, he made another decision: he would start small. After dinner, instead of retreating to his study as usual, he followed the children to the living room where they were playing. The maid looked surprised to see him sit down on the carpet with them. At first, the twins froze, unsure of what their father was doing. But then he smiled and asked if he could join their game. It felt strange at first. He had never played board games with them before. He was clumsy, not knowing the rules, and the children giggled at his mistakes. But slowly, laughter filled the room. The twins began to guide him through the game, their nervousness fading into excitement. The maid watched quietly, a soft smile on her face, as if she understood the importance of that moment. Later that night, as he walked back to his room, the millionaire felt lighter. The distance between him and his children had not disappeared, but for the first time in years, he felt a bridge being built. It was a small step, but it was a beginning. In the days that followed, he tried to do more. He adjusted his schedule to come home earlier. He began asking his children about their day, listening carefully to their answers. At first, they were shy, answering in short sentences. But with time, they opened up more, sharing stories from school and little jokes that made them laugh. He realized how much he had missed their favorite colors, the subjects they loved, the little dreams they held in their hearts. Each discovery made him feel both joy and regret. Joy, because he was finally part of their world. Regret, because he had been absent for so long. Still, progress was slow. Sometimes, the children still ran to the maid first when they were upset. Sometimes, they still clung to her more than to him. Each time it happened, his heart ached. But instead of feeling bitter, he began to understand. The maid had been their anchor. She had filled the role he had abandoned. For that, he could only feel gratitude. One evening, he found himself standing in the doorway of their room again. The twins were drawing pictures on the floor while the maid sat beside them. He noticed that most of their drawings included her, a smiling figure holding their hands, standing beside them in a house. He looked closer and saw that he was often missing from the pictures. That realization struck him deeply. His children's world had been shaped without him in it. But then, something unexpected happened. His daughter looked up, saw him at the door, and waved excitedly for him to join. It was a simple gesture, but it filled him with hope. He stepped inside, sat on the floor, and for the first time in years, picked up a crayon to draw with them. The children laughed at his terrible sketches, but they laughed with him, not at him. For a few minutes, he felt like a real father again. That night, when the children went to bed, he sat alone in the living room, lost in thought. The maid approached quietly, her steps soft against the floor. She hesitated before speaking, but finally said, "They love you, you know. They always talk about you." Her words surprised him. He turned to look at her, and for the first time, he saw the truth in her eyes. His children did love him. They had never stopped. They had only learned to find comfort where it was given. The realization gave him strength. As he sat there in silence, he made a firm decision. He would not let his children grow up thinking of him as a stranger. He would change, even if it was difficult, even if it meant breaking years of old habits. He would fight for their love, not with gifts or money, but with his presence. And deep down, he knew this journey was not just about his children. It was also about healing himself. The millionaire woke up the next morning with a new sense of purpose. For years, he had lived with the belief that success was measured in numbers, profits, and recognition. But now, he began to see that the true success of a man was in the hearts that beat for him at home. His children were his greatest wealth, and he had nearly lost them to his own neglect. That realization was both painful and powerful, and it gave him the strength to begin changing his ways. At breakfast, instead of rushing through a quick meal and disappearing into his car, he sat with the twins and the maid. The children looked surprised, almost unsure of how to react. He smiled at them and asked simple questions about school, their teachers, and their favorite subjects. At first, their answers were short and shy. But when he continued listening patiently, showing real interest, their little faces brightened. His son told him about a science project, while his daughter excitedly described a painting she had made. He listened, nodding, and even asked follow-up questions. The twins exchanged curious glances with each other. This was not the father they were used to. The maid watched quietly from the side. She had seen many mornings where the children ate silently, while their father's mind was already at work. Now, she noticed something different. His eyes were softer, his voice gentler, as if he had finally realized how much those small conversations mattered. She could not help but smile. Later that day, the millionaire surprised everyone further. He returned from work earlier than usual, carrying small bags of simple snacks instead of expensive gifts. He asked the maid to join them in the living room as he sat down on the floor with the children. They played a board game together, shared the snacks, and laughed more freely than they had in years. The atmosphere in the mansion began to shift. It no longer felt like a cold palace of marble and glass. It slowly began to feel like a home. But the change was not easy. The millionaire struggled at first. He had never been good at expressing emotions, and sometimes he felt awkward trying to join in the children's play. There were moments when the twins still ran past him straight into the maid's arms for comfort. Each time it happened, a part of him hurt. Yet he did not give up. Instead, he took it as a reminder of how much he had to learn. One night, he decided to do something he had never done before. He offered to read the children a bedtime story. The twins looked surprised, almost doubtful, but then nodded eagerly. He sat on the edge of their bed, holding the book with stiff hands at first. His voice stumbled through the first few lines, but soon he relaxed. The children listened quietly, their eyes wide, and even giggled at the funny parts. By the time he finished, they were smiling up at him in a way he had not seen in years. When his daughter hugged him good night, his heart melted. The maid, who had been standing quietly at the door, wiped a tear from her eye. She had never imagined she would see such a moment in this house. Over the next few weeks, the millionaire worked hard to balance his business with his family life. He began delegating more tasks at work, learning to trust others with responsibilities he had always carried alone. He realized that while money could be made again, the childhood of his twins would never return once it passed. This thought pushed him to spend every possible moment with them. He started helping them with their homework, though he often struggled to remember school lessons. His son laughed when he made mistakes in math, and his daughter patiently corrected his spelling. Instead of feeling embarrassed, he laughed along with them, grateful for the chance to be part of their learning. The maid, who had been the children's main source of support for so long, noticed the changes with quiet pride. She had never asked for recognition, but now she felt respected in a way she had not before. The millionaire began thanking her sincerely, not just for her work, but for the love she had given his children when he could not. One Saturday afternoon, the millionaire decided to take the children to the park himself. He had always left such outings to the maid or to other staff. But this time, he wanted to hold their hands, push them on the swings, and watch them run freely under the sun. The children were delighted. They ran through the grass, laughing and calling for him to chase them. For the first time in a long while, he felt alive, not as a businessman but as a father. The maid sat nearby, watching them with a contented heart. She knew the children had longed for this moment, and now they finally had it. The millionaire began to notice small but important changes in his twins. They started talking to him more openly, sharing their fears and dreams. His son confessed that he sometimes felt lonely at school because other children had fathers who attended events, while his did not. His daughter said she wished he would come to her art exhibitions. Listening to their words, the millionaire felt deep regret, but he also felt grateful that they were finally opening up to him. He promised himself he would never miss another important moment in their lives. The bond between father and children grew stronger with each passing day. The maid remained a central figure in their lives, but instead of feeling replaced, the millionaire now saw her as a partner in raising them. He respected her more than ever, understanding that her patience and love had kept his children's hearts soft during the years he had been absent. The change in the millionaire did not go unnoticed by others. Friends and relatives who visited the mansion were surprised to see him sitting on the floor playing with crayons, or walking hand in hand with his children in the garden. They whispered in shock this was not the man they knew, the man who had once been too proud to bend, too busy to stop. But the millionaire did not care about their opinions anymore. For the first time, he felt at peace with himself. Every night, when he kissed his children good night, he silently thanked life for giving him a second chance. The memory of that evening when he saw them sleeping on the floor with the maid remained clear in his mind. It had been the turning point, the moment that woke him from his blindness. He often thought about how different things might have been if he had ignored it. But he hadn't, and for that, he was grateful. One evening, after the twins had gone to bed, the millionaire found himself sitting across from the maid in the quiet living room. He looked at her with sincerity and said, "Thank you. I don't think I ever realized how much you've done, not just for the house, but for my children. You gave them what I couldn't, and I'll never forget that." The maid, humble as always, shook her head and replied, "They only needed love. Anyone could see that. I only gave them what a child should always have." Her words touched him deeply. He realized then that respect and gratitude were the least he could offer her for the sacrifices she had made. From that night on, he treated her not as a servant but as part of the family. The mansion, once filled only with wealth and silence, had finally found its missing warmth. Weeks turned into months, and slowly the entire atmosphere of the mansion changed. Where once the halls echoed only with silence and the sound of servants moving quietly about, now laughter filled the rooms. The millionaire, who had once been too busy to notice even the smallest details of his children's lives, was now present for them in every way he could be. The twins had begun to look at him differently, not as a distant figure they barely knew, but as a father they could trust and run to with open arms. One morning, the twins rushed into his room carrying drawings they had made. In the past, they might have shown them only to the maid, but now they wanted their father's opinion. Their little faces glowed with excitement as they spread the papers out on his bed. The drawings showed their family, not just the two children, but their father too, smiling and holding their hands. For the first time, he was no longer missing from their pictures. He felt his eyes sting with tears as he realized how much that simple detail meant. He hugged them tightly, whispering that he was proud of them. The maid watched this scene from the doorway, her heart full. She had been the bridge between father and children for so long, and now she could finally see that the gap was closing. The bond that should have always been there was finally growing stronger, day by day. As the weeks passed, the millionaire began making changes not just at home but in his entire lifestyle. He reduced his late-night meetings, choosing instead to have dinner with his children. He limited his business trips, often taking the twins along if he absolutely had to travel. He realized that while money was important for survival, it was not the reason he was alive. Life, he now understood, was meant to be shared with the people you loved. The change in him was noticed by everyone who knew him. Friends who once admired only his wealth now admired his transformation as a father. Relatives who had whispered behind his back about how distant he was now spoke of how gentle and involved he had become. Even his employees, who had always seen him as a stern businessman, noticed a softer side when he spoke about his children. But the most shocking change was the way he treated the maid. Once, he had barely acknowledged her beyond giving instructions. Now, he spoke to her with respect, often asking for her opinion regarding the children. He thanked her openly in front of the twins, telling them that she had been like a guardian angel when he was not there. The children smiled proudly when they heard those words, because to them, she was already family. One evening, the millionaire decided to host a small gathering at his mansion for close relatives and business associates. In the past, such events had been all about showing off his wealth: the expensive wines, the luxurious decorations, the endless dishes served at the table. But this time, it was different. He wanted people to see not just his house, but his home. As guests arrived, they were shocked to see the millionaire on the floor, playing with his twins before dinner was served. They watched in surprise as he laughed freely, unbothered by appearances or reputation. Some whispered in disbelief, saying, "This cannot be the same man we knew." Others smiled, touched by the genuine warmth they saw in him. During the dinner, the maid walked quietly through the room, making sure everything was in order. The millionaire noticed her and, to the amazement of his guests, invited her to sit at the table with them. At first, she refused, embarrassed, but he insisted. "You belong here," he said gently. "You are part of this family." The room fell silent. Many of his wealthy guests had never seen such humility from him. A man once known for his pride was now showing gratitude and respect to the woman who had once been overlooked by everyone. The twins clapped happily, pulling the maid into a chair beside them. For the rest of the evening, the mansion was filled not just with polite conversations but with genuine joy. That night, after the guests had left, the millionaire sat in the living room with the twins and the maid. He looked at them with deep emotion and said, "I once thought money was everything. I thought if I worked harder, earned more, and gave you everything you asked for, it would be enough. But I was wrong. You taught me that love, time, and kindness are worth more than all the riches in the world. I will never forget this lesson." The children hugged him tightly, and the maid, though quiet, could not hide the tears in her eyes. From that moment on, the millionaire lived with a new purpose. He continued his work, but never at the cost of his family. He attended his son's science exhibition and clapped the loudest when his daughter's painting was displayed at school. He was there for their birthdays, their little victories, and even their failures. He encouraged them, guided them, and most importantly, loved them openly. Years later, when the twins were older, they often looked back at their childhood. They remembered the toys, the big house, and the luxury, but what they remembered most were the moments when their father sat with them, listened to them, and played with them. They remembered the maid who had cared for them like a mother and the way their father had finally learned to respect her and cherish her as family. The millionaire himself became a changed man in the eyes of the world. People no longer spoke only of his wealth but of his character. They said he was proof that even the hardest heart could change when touched by love. They admired him not for his cars or his mansion but for the way he had transformed into a father his children could look up to. And through it all, he never forgot the night that changed everything: the night he saw his twins sleeping peacefully on the floor beside the maid. That single moment had opened his eyes and saved him from a lifetime of regret. Now, when he tucked his children into bed, he often sat beside them, holding their hands until they drifted off to sleep. Sometimes, he even lay on the floor with them, laughing at how much more comfortable it felt than any expensive bed. It was his way of reminding himself of the lesson he had learned, that love was never about wealth, but about presence. In the end, the millionaire discovered that the greatest treasure he had ever possessed was not his fortune, but the love of his children and the warmth of a home built on respect, kindness, and unity. And that, more than anything, was what truly shocked everyone who had once known him as nothing more than a man of riches.